I would say in general, the most important thing, whether it's smart contracts or really anything that a company is doing in the blockchain space or with cryptocurrency, is that this is a legal landmine. There is a lot of complexity. There's both federal and state law within the US, and most of it's international. You have to deal with other country laws. I think it's really critical to know that the law is evolving. While there's been guidance from various agencies, there's a lot of overlap. So the SEC, CFTC, FinCEN, and IRS, all federal agencies, have categorized or classified cryptocurrencies differently. The SEC says it's security, CFTC says it's a commodity, FinCEN says it's money, and the IRS says it's property and it's taxed as property. So you have 4 different classifications by these different agencies. Companies will come to us often who want to comply with the law, and they're like, what we're doing is legal, right? Because so-and-so is doing it and nothing's happened to them. And that's never a good analysis, right? Just because someone is doing something doesn't mean it's legal. It just means maybe they haven't been enforced yet. Or the other thing we see very commonly is someone is doing something and it's legal and it's proper. The client comes in and they want to do something slightly differently, but they view it as the same because it's the same approach, right? We're doing stable coins, they're doing stable coins. It matters, the facts matter. So how you implement it, a different implementation of even a similar concept can create different legal issues. So you really need, as the SEC said, you have to really look at all the facts and circumstances and apply the law. And it's the kind of thing that there's a lot of misinformation out there in the public. There's things that have been written that aren't accurate, create a lot of confusion. The bottom line is you just got to work with an attorney who knows the space, knows the issues, and can get you the right answers for what you're doing or want to do with your business. I think blockchain will be used in every industry, just like the internet was and is. I think blockchain has broad applicability. Smart contracts are a very important tool with respect to implementing applications to get efficiency and other types of things. So I don't really think it's industry specific. I think that it is, like a browser. There's not, you can use it for any application really. I think there's certain areas where smart contracts might make more sense. One of the things that we're seeing, at least initially, is a lot of deployments in supply chain management, and smart contracts can be used at various points along the supply chain to perform different functions to disintermediate or eliminate people that aren't really adding value in the supply chain, to automate things like you could have digital title that can be passed through smart contracts. Other paperwork that gets done manually right now that can sometimes take days to process. Smart contracts can do it much more efficiently and cost effectively. For example, is you think about cold chain logistics, which is a very specific aspect where if you have produce or pharmaceuticals or something that need to be, you have to ensure that they're shipped at a proper temperature all along the supply chain. You can put an IoT sensor on a pallet that has a temperature reader. You can track where that pallet's been, so you can track and trace it from source to when it shows up. And you can have the IoT sensor read the temperature, write that data to a blockchain all along the way. And when the pallet shows up, the smart contract can go out, read the data and say, I'm programmed to say, was the temperature always below 45 degrees? If no, reject it. If yes, then whatever the next step is, you go to the next step. It's a very simple example, but a very practical application. So there's things like that where I think they can just add great efficiency and reduce costs. A smart contract is a series of if-then statements, right? And you can concatenate as many of those as you want. They can be in one smart contract, or you could have multiple smart contracts where a smart contract can be programmed for multiple different scenarios. It could invoke a new smart contract, right? Depending on what the conditions are, if they're satisfied, for example. So yeah, you can have them simple or complex. And I think the other thing that's important with smart contracts is that, the term itself is a misnomer. Most smart contracts will not be a contract. Most of the time you're going to have a written agreement, and you're going to have the smart contract is going to be code that implements the business logic of the agreement. There's certain things that are typically in a legal contract that's very hard to implement in a smart contract. So like choice of jurisdiction is one of the things that comes up. Many times a contract will have a clause that talks about using reasonable commercial efforts. So anytime something is subjective, it's really hard to codify that. And then so typically you'll have a written agreement that's like a regular agreement, and you'll address things like, what if the smart contract doesn't perform the way the parties thought? Or what if you're relying on a data source to feed the smart contract, an Oracle or the data source, and the data is bad, right? How do you deal with that, right? And so the agreement will specify that. And the reason that's important is, as everyone knows, most of the time a blockchain transaction is immutable. Once it's done, you can't undo it. But it doesn't mean you can't fix the result. So if a contract transferred Bitcoin from me to you, and we mutually agree that was a mistake, you can always give me a Bitcoin back. You're not undoing the transaction, you're just doing a new transaction to create a remedy. And I think the other thing that's really important with smart contracts, I think is one of the most powerful and cool things about them, how they differ from something like automated bill pay, which is a similar thing. You have an agreement, services agreement, and there's some code that will just move money every month according to the terms of the contract. One of the things that I think smart contracts enable is a self-enforcement remedy. So you and I can agree that if I lend you money, you're going to pay me back, a certain amount of money every month. And if you don't, and it goes for 30 days, if the contract says, if you don't go 30 days, then you agree you're going to transfer title to your car to me, or there can be some specified action that can be programmed into the smart contract that we mutually agree on. And so instead of the classic case of a car loan default, the lender has to send you a notice of default. If you don't respond, then they have to go to court, they have to get a judgment, then they have to enforce the judgment, they have to go impound the car. You have all these different things that have to happen physically. If you have a digital asset or a token that's in escrow or digital title or something, if the remedy is transfer that token if you default, that's done, right? And so if you agree to it, you don't need to go through judges, juries, and lawyers to get the result you want. Now, it won't be every contract that's like that, but in certain situations, I think that makes enforcement easy. One of the things that we do a lot of with clients right now who are thinking about how they can use blockchain in their industry or for their niche or whatever they're doing is to really understand not just, okay, how can we use it and what does it mean and what do we have to do, but understand up front what the legal issues are. Because some of it takes a lot of planning to make sure that you've dotted all your I's and crossed all your T's. So one of the things that we do with a lot of clients is right now, even if they haven't deployed something, is we're doing these one-on-one presentations with them. We're finding out what they're looking to do. We identify the issues that we see that might arise from that if they do it, and help them understand that now and develop a plan to make sure they've got the legal diligence done, as opposed to saying, okay, here's what we're going to do, and then say, okay, well, now we have to figure out the legal side. Because sometimes you want to factor legal in ahead of time, because we've seen a number of companies that have set out a path and not realizing, for example, that what they were doing was a regulated securities exchange. Because they're like, oh, we're just doing a crypto asset, trading platform. Well, that if the asset is security and you're creating a marketplace, that can be a securities exchange, and you need to comply with securities laws for that. So understanding that can sometimes shape how you implement something, and it's better to figure that out before you get too far down the road and invest too much money on the implementation. Every day is a little bit different. It's really fun right now. This is very much like the mid-90s with the internet. We're seeing a number of companies that we work with that are developing platforms and tools that are trying to help other people implement things. So you're seeing like security tokens are a big thing right now, and there's companies that are building platforms to help companies issue security tokens in a legally compliant way. They're getting registered as broker-dealers and transfer agents, doing all the right things so that each person that they work with doesn't need to go through that process. So that's an example, and same thing in other areas. So we're seeing organizations that are developing smart contract libraries, right? So it's snippets of code that perform certain functions. You might have a variable you can plug in, but you don't have to rewrite code from scratch. So just knowing the resources that are out there to simplify things that have been proven out and validated, and then figuring out the legal issues around that, that combination. We're just seeing a variety of infrastructure companies that are making it easier for people to do things, and then the applications on top of that, and smart contracts are an important part of that. And it's very fun because it's, every day is like a new adventure.